You know, when I was growing up in the 60s, I watched a lot of television, watched a lot of movies, and the only positive representation I saw of anything trans-feminine was Bugs Bunny. When Bugs Bunny was doing girl, Bugs Bunny was desirable and was powerful.
Yes, I know it. I can't help it.
Bugs looked, really cute. I like that part.
Why are there so many furries in the trans community? Trans people say that it's a stereotype made by conservatives, but this clip is from a documentary made by Netflix to promote transgenderism. Trans people aren't really helping their own case when they say stuff like this. Not really helping with the grooming allegations either, considering that Bugs Bunny is a children's cartoon. And this scene is far from being the craziest one. The documentary is called Disclosure. It was made in 2020, and the main point of the movie is that trans people should withhold the truth of their biological sex and have no obligation to tell the truth to anyone, including romantic partners. In this video, I will highlight the most insane parts of the documentary and analyze them through a TERF or trans-exclusionary radical feminist lens. Hi, my name is Mariana, and on my channel I dissect film, television, and video games from a radical feminist perspective. Gender-critical feminism is a form of feminism that rejects the concept of gender and only accepts the reality of biological sex. It is referred to by trans activists as trans-exclusionary radical feminism. This form of feminism believes that women live more difficult lives than men, not because of gender identity, but because of biological sex and because society is set up to benefit male bodies. It also rejects trans ideology because trans ideology relies on gender stereotypes. For example, women have long hair and wear pink, while men have short hair and have a more rugged fashion style. Before I begin, I want to preface this video by saying that this video is merely intended to bring forth certain inconsistencies in the logic of transgender ideology, and why those logical fallacies work to undermine the rights of women. This video does not advocate for harassment against any trans individuals. It does not promote violence, nor support participation in hate groups of any kind. There's a big difference between personal hatred and extremism versus political disagreement. I can be friends with someone I disagree with. That includes trans people. I want to make it absolutely clear that this is for informational purposes only, for the sake of film criticism and political commentary. In the film, Laverne Cox says that he thinks it's wrong that in old Hollywood, men cross-dressing as women was portrayed as a joke and mocked. He says that this is offensive.
When you watch, it very much feels like womanhood is silly and is to be mocked.
However, when he says this, he is logically inconsistent with his own beliefs. Drag literally makes womanhood into a joke. In the popular show RuPaul's Drag Race, if you look up the made-up names of drag queens that performed, they are degrading. For example, penetration is meant to sound like penetration. Names like Selena S. Titties and Candy Ho objectify women. This is anti-feminist, especially given the context that men made up these names. If you look at this clip from RuPaul's Drag Race, you can see that visually, these men are showing off an exaggerated caricature of femininity. And invariably, these men will act in comedic ways that make fun of women and how we act. Here is an example of Laverne Cox supporting drag.
That representation felt like it existed as a joke.
It lends itself to this idea that we're just comedy, that we're just some kind of freaks, that we just play and dress up in order to make other people laugh.
These images are so disparaging towards all women. And we see comedians dressing up as women in order to get a job in Tootsie.
This is a huge point made in the documentary multiple times. He keeps pointing out that older media shows men dressing up as women to make fun of women. However, this is selective outrage, as Laverne Cox clearly supports drag, which in many ways is even more of a degrading, exaggerated parody of womanhood. This clip was extra insidious because he says it in a way to try to convince women that transgenderism is feminist, and to get women to work against their own best interests. In fact, later in the movie, He talks about how a sexualized parody of femininity influenced his view on what it meant to be a transgender woman. Indeed, many actual women find trans women and drag offensive because it's just an exaggerated sexualized version of how men perceive women to be. The movie admits that trans women conform to an exaggerated misogynistic view of womanhood, and then, in a weird twist, does nothing to defend trans ideology against this accusation.
A lot of people will look at trans women's performance of femininity and see it as somehow reinforcing the worst patriarchal stereotypes of women. And I think it's really unfair and ahistorical to voice that same perspective on people who are just trying to survive.
Just trying to survive. Got it. So unless you conform to beauty standards, you won't be able to survive. How progressive. In many ways, drag can be compared to blackface because both are degrading exaggerations based on stereotypes of a marginalized group. In this scene, trans activists criticize an old movie for having blackface in it, saying that it's wrong to pretend to be black and portray racist stereotypes. Obviously, I agree that blackface is wrong and offensive. This is why I must point out that in the same movie, women dress up as men and portray sexist stereotypes of maleness. But according to trans activists, that's totally fine. This is a complete double standard and there's no logical consistency.
See so many of our strong butch girls giving up their womanhood to be a man.
And so they're looking at trans people through a lesbian lens.
Why can't you be the butchest butch in the world?
The documentary film denies butch lesbian erasure, a term that describes what happens when butch lesbians are told by society that they are men simply because they don't conform to sexist stereotypes. Butch lesbians often transition because of internalized misogyny and homophobia.
Because I want to feel whole. I want the outside of me to match the inside of me.
I want the outside of me to match the inside of me? What does that even mean? That because she has a certain personality on the inside, then she can't be a woman on the outside? This is anti-feminist because it implies that women are all limited to a certain type of personality. In the documentary, the trans activists criticize a TV show named The L Word. The L Word apparently has TERF philosophy, as it portrays a trans man as, in a way, betraying her fellow woman. Well, I guess I know what TV series I'm reviewing next. Feminists typically agree with each other that "I'm not like other girls" energy should be frowned upon. Trans men and women who identify as non-binary embody this energy to the extreme.
You're gonna sell out? Start sleeping with the enemy?
This TV show honestly sounds like radfem Twitter. I kinda love it. In this scene, a trans woman assumes that a cross-dressing man is transgender. But why is this man labeled as transgender? Why is this not just a cross-dressing man? Conservatives often say that people should change their personality to fit their biology, while trans activists say that people should change their biology to fit their gendered personality. TERFs, aka the based people, believe that anyone can have any personality regardless of biology. Another way of saying this would be that conservatives, for example, think that only women wear dresses. Trans ideology would say that anyone who wears a dress is a woman. TERFs would say that anyone can wear dresses, it doesn't make them a woman. This clip proves that trans people literally think that anyone who wears a dress is a woman. This way of thinking is still sexist and similar to conservative thought.
There's a claim that this is one of the first films that we know of where the cut in the film is used to advance the story. It's almost like the figure of the cut trans body presides over the invention of the cinematic cut. It's like trans and cinema have grown up together. It's like we have always been present.
This is also a stretch. I don't think the filmmakers intended at all for this to be a transgender metaphor. And it's narcissistic to say that they did because it makes you feel more important.
It's not who I am. You know, I went to church every Sunday and was a straight A student and I won talent shows. And then I turn on the television and I see these images that don't seem to comport with like the person that I knew I was.
This is how many trans people look though. Like if you go on social media, a lot of trans women do look like this. So it actually seems like he's complaining that the cross-dressing men aren't conforming enough to beauty standards. Wanting beauty standards is a conservative take.
What I knew was, when I spent time with my brother and my father, they laughed at the Three Stooges. The Three Stooges, really? I'm a Lucy girl.
Trans ideology cares deeply about conforming to beauty standards. Such a big part of transgenderism involves plastic surgery, manufactured femininity, and conforming to gendered expectations. It's actually incredibly conservative in its energy.
And watching the film recently, I felt super connected to Brandon, to go bumper surfing, right? To be drinking beers, to be opening doors for girls.
Going bumper surfing, drinking beers, and opening doors for girls. Is this what being a man is? That's a very stereotyped view of masculinity, almost conservative in nature. You heard it here first. If you drink beer, it makes you more of a man. The filmmakers know the radical feminist argument against transgenderism, but they don't have a valid argument in response.
And I worked up the courage to tell one of my colleagues, and she looked at me and she goes, "You mean like Buffalo Bill?" Like her only point of reference was this disgusting, psychotic serial killer who hunts women in order to kill them and skin them in order to wear their bodies, to literally appropriate the female form, which is exactly like the feminist argument against the existence of trans women, is that we're trying to appropriate the female form. And here he was doing it literally, physically.
Wow, a serial killer film that critiques entitled men who think that they can appropriate the female form? Honestly, it sounds based.
Trans women vastly outnumber trans men in terms of depictions and portrayals in the media. And of course, that's partly because women overall, therefore including trans women, are a more commodifiable asset.
No. The reason why trans women get more attention in the media than trans men is because trans women are, in reality, men. Men have all the power in society and therefore decide what is shown in the media. Men tend to support and uplift other men. The film complains that the public sees trans women as men in disguise. It claims that that's why Jared Leto, a biological male actor who played a trans woman in a movie, was awarded an Oscar. Because despite the fact that he played a trans woman in a film, the public sees him as a man. Jared Leto's male privilege gets him more awards and attention. Even outside the Oscars, biological men who play trans women in movies are disproportionately awarded compared to biological women who play trans men. There's a clear bias towards biological males within society, and gender identity doesn't erase that.
To my mind, Dog Day Afternoon is the par exemplar of this issue around trans casting, particularly of men. They cast Chris Sarandon, and it was his very first movie role, and he was nominated for an Oscar for it.
Chris Sarandon and Dog Day Afternoon.
This has been going on for 40 years.
John Lithgow in The World According to Garp.
Cillian Murphy, Breakfast on Pluto.
Eddie Redmayne, The Danish Girl.
Having cis men play trans women.
If the public actually saw trans people as the gender they identify as, then trans men would receive more awards than trans women, and Jared Leto wouldn't have won that Oscar. The real reason why trans women get more attention compared to trans men is because trans women have male privilege. Also, transgender ideology is a men's rights movement. It essentially says that men can identify into an oppressed status. The logic is that males who identify as trans are more oppressed than women, and therefore, men can be more oppressed than women. The thinking that men are more oppressed than women is the backbone of all men's rights movements. Seeing that male-to-female transgenderism is a men's rights movement in disguise, it is in the best interest of men to promote transgender women more than transgender men. Transgenderism is also a men's rights movement because it removes female-only spaces and female-only activities. Women are no longer allowed to exclude men from women-only organizations, for example. Men's rights activists for years have been complaining about women-only organizations that exclude men. Transgenderism is a men's rights movement because it prioritizes male feelings over female safety.
I go into the women's restroom, then I've committed a crime. If I go in the men's restroom, then everybody knows
So everyone being kept from the truth and protecting your feelings is more important than the safety of women and children. Trying to convince women that their instincts to protect themselves are irrational is a form of gaslighting.
I think capitalizing on people's fear is what has landed us in this moment right now.
We're being taught that the way to react to us is fear. We're dangerous, that we're psychopaths, that we're serial killers, that we must be deviants or perverts.
It's completely rational for women to be cautious around biological men, and to say that we shouldn't be is not only anti-feminist, it's anti-science. The film also supports men identifying their way into women's prisons. This is dangerous. Men who identify their way into women's prisons are more likely to be in prison because of sexual assault. Women in prisons are particularly vulnerable because they do not have the ability to leave the space that they are in. For example, Isla Bryson was sent to prison for sexually assaulting 2 women, decided to transition after conviction, and was sent to a women's prison. Fortunately, after immense public backlash, he was sent to a male prison. But most cases like this do not get nearly the same amount of public attention and go unnoticed.
Then Max starts testosterone.
Hey, don't do that. Stop it. Delete it. Don't. My fucking computer, stop it. Hey, don't delete it.
And Max goes from being nice and likable to a raging a-hole.
You're my girlfriend.
I mean, that's what testosterone does, biologically. That's why there's the term roid rage when a man takes too much steroids, an artificially created form of testosterone. To say that men are not more aggressive and violent than women is again anti-feminist. The film also denies the severity of the medical side effects of transitioning. These clips show 2 trans women complaining about how the shows they were cast in portray harmful stereotypes. But if they had such a problem with it, why did they agree to be in the shows? Why did they still take the money of the people who hired them?
I can't even tell you how many times I've been in public space, particularly early in my transition in New York City, where when I would walk into a subway car and people would just burst into laughter.
Well, there's a difference between being laughed at on the street and being sexually harassed and assaulted. These are not the same. Women have a higher chance of being sexually assaulted on the street since the majority of men are straight. There are a minimal amount of trans women who actually pass. Plus, because trans women are men, they are physically stronger and can more easily protect themselves. Trans activists love to argue that men are just as oppressed as women.
Rita was on Jerry Springer, comes out, this beautiful little black guy. He's out there with his girlfriend. And he's like, I got something to tell you. I'm a girl. That blew my mind.
The film does nothing to denounce that lying about your transgender status to a romantic partner is wrong. Lying in a romantic relationship is wrong, period. But telling a lie this big honestly should invariably lead to a breakup. Later, the film explicitly states that trans people should not have to disclose to romantic partners that they are trans.
But frankly, I kind of hate the idea of disclosure.
You told me about your parents, your sister, your hobbies. Sat for 3 hours on a porch talking about everything. You left out the fact that you used to be a man.
And that presupposes that the other person might have some kind of issue or problem with what's to be disclosed.
Again, honesty is necessary for any relationship to work, and people are justified in expressing disdain towards anyone who lies to them.
And that their feelings matter more than mine.
This is a narcissistic approach to relationships, valuing your own feelings above the other person's. I am convinced that this person is a narcissist, so much so that he values his own feelings above saying goodbye to his grandmother when she was dying.
In order to deal with not being able to see my grandma before she died, because I could only come home if I dressed as a boy.
If a biological woman had to choose between wearing a frilly pink dress versus being able to say goodbye to her dying grandmother, I'm pretty sure she would choose her grandmother over the dress.
Why couldn't my mom have been like him? Why couldn't my friends been like him? And seeing the value in my experience.
The film provides examples of how prolific transgenderism has become, showing how trans people are winning awards and getting recognition at a disproportionate rate, mostly because of unfair woke politics.
I never thought I'd live in a world where trans people would be celebrated on or off the screen.
Thank you so much for this moment.
I never thought the media would stop asking horrible questions.
How do you hide your peanuts?
And start treating us with respect.
You kept it quiet because you said you didn't want to become othered.
Now, look how far we've come.
Okay, so are you oppressed in Hollywood or not? It becomes clear that trans people are in fact not marginalized at all in Hollywood. Shortly after this clip is shown.
The more we are seen, the more we are violated.
This is incredibly self-contradictory. This person is just finding petty reasons to complain. It's like trans activists want to keep their oppressed status despite clearly admitting earlier that they are not oppressed.
I've played a sex worker a few times. Not that there's anything wrong with doing sex work for a living, but it's just not all that we are.
These people have absolutely zero logical consistency. If sex work was good, then they would not at all have a problem with being only portrayed as sex workers. For example, in modern TV and film, trans women are only portrayed as virtuous and passing, which they seem to not have a problem with. For the record, I don't agree that sex work is work, because it's dangerous and degrading to women. See, that's how logical consistency works.
If you're a transgender kid, you are living with a unicorn, an amazing human being.
It is so creepy to encourage little kids to transition. When you do this, it not only teaches kids to accept gender stereotypes, it could also lead to irreversible damage should they choose to transition. Children are not in the mental state to be able to make permanent decisions with severe consequences. Overall, this documentary was such a train wreck. Green hair having performative activist cringe. Except instead of women and marginalized people talking about being oppressed, this film had men talking about how cross-dressing makes them oppressed, while being paid generously to participate in a film promoting said cross-dressing. The film was so 2016 in its energy. You know, for a group so obsessed with looks and fashion, it's shocking that they haven't realized how out of fashion their politics have gotten. These activists should stop being such dinosaurs and, you know, get with the times. I am new to making video essays on YouTube, but I plan to make more soon, and consistently. If you enjoyed this video, please consider following me on Twitch as well. I live stream every weekday, so if you want to hang out and chat, feel free to stop by. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.